Dear student, the topic of this video is the history of medicine. Every MBBS student has to know the history of medicine because it is the evolutionary journey of humankind through thousands of years as man wanted to conquer the mystery around him with curiosity and knowledge. We all know that knowledge is universal. It can illuminate anyone, irrespective of religion, caste, creed, rich, poor, color of skin, and gender. And from this picture, we can see that this transferring of knowledge, it has been started from this cave age, from the era where the human being were lived in cave. So the transferring the ray of wisdom from one person to another, from the teacher or gurus to disciple, is going on throughout the ages. And on the right hand side we can see the modern age doctors and the students, and this transfer of knowledge is still going on. In the medical science, what those teachers and gurus they transferred, they asked their pupils or disciples to utilize the knowledge to relieve pain, to cure diseases, to give comfort to the human lives. So here comes the principles of ethical principles, like it should be, your practice should be for the benefit of humankind, that is beneficence. It should never be to cause harm to the humankind, so that is non-maleficence. It should be justified and it should be practiced with autonomy. So this is the message that has been transferred from thousands of years, from the initial physicians till to the modern doctors, from our teachers to us, from us to our students, that do not harm. Do no harm to any of the diseased. Always try to act for the beneficence of the humankind. This is the basic mantra of all medical practice. If we look at the point from where actually the journey of this evolutionary journey started, we'll see that in September 1940, four French teenagers stumbled upon one of the most famous and astounding collection of Paleolithic art in the world, the Cave of Lascaux in the Pyrenees Mountains. It is the world's oldest example of medicine in art, dating back 15,000 years. This showed the lone human figure among all the animals is a man with the head of a bird, who appears to be in a confrontation with a bull, and beside him is a staff. It is believed that the human figure is some sort of shaman or the medicine man. Shaman were in charge of the knowledge of health, of life and of death. Primitive man believed that headaches was the work of evil spirits who invaded the body of unfortunate individuals. Letting the spirits out of the skull would bring relief. Thus the surgical procedure trepanning was born in that era. Today we are talking about the scientific knowledge, proved knowledge, evidence-based knowledge, not just the superstitious beliefs depending on supernatural forces or demons. But at that time, that was the age of superstitions. Only few people in those superstitious age started to separate scientific knowledge from magical illusions. One of them was Imhotep. Imhotep lived in Egypt in 2900 before Christ. He seems to have been a successful physician. He is one of the first medical men whose name is on record and became known as the god of medicine. He began using simple surgery instead of just magic. Ebers Papyrus was the oldest collection of medical writings, that is around 1600 before Christ. It covered 200 diseases, extracted medicines from plants, knew position of vital organs and circulation of blood. Here actually all these collections, they tells about the inquisitiveness of the human being. They ask questions. The power of asking question is the main thing that has to be incorporated in the heart of every medical student. From the recorded history, we gather that there are three areas in those ancient ages where actually these scientific practices had began. It was the ancient India, China, and the Greece. They simultaneously began studying the biology in a methodical and rational way. The Hindu philosophers, as they were called at that time, established medical institutions of some sort and trained students who were wholly devoted to relief of sufferings of mankind. And the ancient Hindu medical book or Ayurveda was published 1000 years before Christ. And this was subsequently developed into book form in the Sushruta Samhita and the Charak Samhita. Both are the disciples of the previous gurus. And we will see that the Sushruta also practiced surgery. Sushruta also gives classifications of the bones and their reaction to injuries, varieties of dislocation of joints and fractures of the shaft, and all of them they were written in a very systematical pattern. Ancient Greece too in their own way developed the science of biology. The two great names in the history of Greek medicine was Hippocrates and Galen. Hippocrates dominated the beginning of scientific creativity and it lasted more than 700 years. He taught against such improper conduct and he taught his students to treat everyone the same. He was the first to attempt to separate the practice of medicine from religion and superstition. Hippocrates a century later, there appeared another great man in the city of Athens. He was Aristotle. 384 before Christ, and this is a man who excelled in every branch of science. He was the teacher of Alexander the Great, and Aristotle noted the appearance and habits of creatures and recorded 500 species of animals in his book on natural history. He even tried to classify animals based on differences of forms and appearance of them. He also realized the gradual progression of animals to man, who stands at the peak of creation. He independently can be accredited in Western culture, the father of modern zoology. So this is the city of Athens, where we can see Aristotle. Alexander the Great expanded his reign, and after the fall of Persian Empire to Alexander the Great, the Greek culture spread far and wide and it came to Alexandria. So this is a modern picture of Alexandria. Here we will find the history of a disciple of Aristotle, that is Herophilus. Herophilus was the first scientist to systematically perform scientific dissections of human cadavers. So it was 300 before Christ. So initially it was a cave painting. Then the three areas, the India, China and Greece. And the Greece expansion of Greek civilization to Alexandria in the Egypt. Now the Herophilus who started the dissection of human cadavers. Herophilus, like the ancient Indians, suggested that brain was the seat of intelligence and not designed to cool blood, as was the Hippocratic belief. So initially the time of Hippocrates, it was believed that the function of the brain, it is to cool the blood. But this Herophilus questioned that belief. So here lies the basic concept of medicine, that is the question, the inquisitiveness. Whoever may be given the verdict, it may be the powerful, it may be the teacher, it may be a Nobel laureate, but your experience should have the ability to question that belief and to prove yourself. So this inquisitiveness is also an essence of medical science or medical student. Herophilus had one famous pupil whose name was Erasistratus. Erasistratus was a very famous neurologist, and he actually founded some very important facts about the brain. Erasistratus studied the brain and identified its division into cerebrum and cerebellum, and could see the more number of convolutions in man compared to animals. He ascribed the functions of intelligence to these convolutions too. So here we can see the picture of Herophilus and Erasistratus. Here is a funny story that goes with Erasistratus, that he once went into a house to treat the illness of Antiquus, and he diagnosed that the disease of his patient, it is due to the love sickness for his stepmother, and he gave this diagnosis by observing that Antiochus' pulse rate, it rose whenever he saw his stepmom. So the change of pulse and its relationship to the emotion, it has been demonstrated in that era too by Erasistratus. After a certain time, the Greek civilization fell, and that started the age of Romans. But the Romans remained content with the collection and preservation of the discoveries of the past, that to devote time for new discoveries, to new discoveries. So during this Roman period, some of the great scientists was there. One of them was Galen. Galen actually he was a Greek person, and he started practicing in Rome. He dissected dogs, sheep and other animals and studied the anatomy as the ancient and Indians did when they sacrificed various animals as religious rites. Now Galen, the great 2nd century physician and anatomist, spent his early medical career as a surgeon to the gladiators. He employed as many as 20 scribes to write down all that he said during his work. He dissected animals, and he thought that infections were caused by clouds of poisonous gases. Galen believed that disease resulted from an imbalance of the vital fluids or humors of the body, The body has in itself blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. We enjoy the most perfect health when these elements are in the right proportion. One of the important doctrine of Galen was that the surest judge of all will be experience alone. So this says our history says our predecessors, they say that believe on your own experience, just don't believe whatever was said by your predecessors. Question, question and question. So the Roman falls in 476 after death. As the Roman Empire ended, Europe fell into the Dark Ages. Superstition crept back into beliefs about medicines, and people were taught that diseases were punishments from God. In this medieval Dark Age, Europe was hit with a terrible epidemic that killed millions of people called the plague or the Black Death. Two deadly forms of the plague, one was the pneumonic plague, another was the bubonic plague. Although it was a dark age, although the tyrants or the powerful persons, they prevented all type of scientific practices and the superstitious beliefs they prevailed. But there are some sporadic areas where some erudite, knowledgeable persons, they acted as candles. The knowledge they gained from their gurus or from their teachers, they kept that light illuminated. Although in a very small amount, in very sporadic areas, but it persisted. For example, it persisted in India from the Buddhism, and during the reign of King Ashoka and Harshavardhana, they founded the institutions like Nalanda and Pataliputra University, and it was also persisted in the Arab. The celebrated Persian physician was the Avicenna. The medical schools and hospitals were built to support the work of Arabic doctors who further explored medicine as a science. The actual name of Avicenna was the Abu Ali al-Hussein Ibosino, commonly known as by his Latin name Avicenna or Ibsina. He wrote many books by collecting materials from the Greek scholars and Celsus books. The flourishing of the Arabs put the Christians into disarray, so no notable contributions were made by them in the field of science. Then came the age of Renaissance. When the dark cloud is gone, then the period of Renaissance began, and it began from Italy. Development of University of Medicine at the northern Italy, and it was a wealthy town of Bologna and Padua, where actually these universities were built, and then in France and England, and Germany was lagged behind during this time. One of the most famous painter of this era was Leonardo da Vinci, who contributed a lot to the medical science. He not only dissected animal and human body, but drew many beautiful illustrations about the anatomical position of bones, joints, eye, heart, like this. And he made hundreds of anatomically correct drawings. In 1542, French physician Jean Fenel actually he coined the term first the physiology by the term physiologia. In Latin that means physis means nature and logia means knowledge, meaning discourse of nature, and later on the term physiology was adopted from the Greek word physiologikos. The major breakthrough was achieved with the publication in after date 1543 by Andreas Berzelius, a printed book on anatomy, De Corporis Humani Fabrica. So we can see in the next slide the view of this oldest book, and his careful studies, this Andreas Berzelius, his careful studies provided doctors with accurate informations. Berzelius did not accept the teachings of Galen without experimenting on his own, and Berzelius kept a copy of Galen's book on hand and made changes in them. So this is the thing, this is the essence of research, this is the essence of inquisitiveness and the evidence-based medicine which dares to change the predecessor's work. This is the famous book De Corporis Humani Fabrica. We can see in the next slide. This is the book. This book had 663 pages with 300 illustrations. Berzelius spent his personal fortune and all his enthusiasm on it. The publication of Fabrica marked a turning point in the history of medicine. The new Italian achievement in biology took the place to obsolete Greek anatomy. Berzelius' pupil Gabriel Fallopius, who was a professor of anatomy in the University and botany at the University of Padua. We can see this is the University of Padua now, and these are the students and their lives in the Padua. He continued with the new tradition established by his teacher Berzelius. He studied the reproductive system very thoroughly. And he described the fallopian tube. The fallopian tube is in the name of this new Italian scientist or physician Gabriel Fallopius. During this time, another famous personality or surgeon was Ambroise Paré. Paré used ointments and silk thread to repair injuries in place of burning oil and hot pokers. Paré did not have a formal education. He never earned a medical degree, yet he became France's most skilled surgeon. In 1562, he was given the dignified title First Surgeon of the King. As the medical science progressed, people or students' inquisitiveness they have increased, and there are requirement of more human bodies to see the position of bones, the origin and on insertion of muscles, the course of the nerve, and no one donated bodies to science. Churchgoers believed in rising from grave, so dissection spoiled chances of resurrection. It became a tradition to rely on executed prisoners. So from where the anatomists and the physicians got their bodies? From the executed prisoners, even up to 18th and 19th centuries. The added punishment of being dissected after death was considered another deterrent from crime. Anatomists were often associated with executioners, so they became friends with the executioners so that they can get the body to dissect. Some medical students raided graveyards. Some professors did also. In certain Scottish schools in 1700 centuries, you could trade a corpse for your tuition. By 1828 in London, body snatchers provided medical schools with corpses. Not a crime, a dead body could not be owned or stolen. Anatomy studies were only conducted from October to May to avoid the smell of decomposition. Wealthy people choose to be buried in iron cages, some covered in concrete. Also, churches built dead houses which were locked and guarded so that the body snatcher cannot rob their body for dissection. This is a famous picture of Rembrandt where the dissection class is happening. So when you, the first year students, you will go to your dissection hall in the anatomy department, you can relate yourself with this person in the picture. So they have started this practice, and you as a new learner, a new candidate of medical education, you are going to you are going to act as the torch bearer of this man. Another famous picture of Rembrandt, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tuck. So from Greece, India and China, then it came to the Alexandria, then the Romans, then the medieval dark period, then Renaissance and Italy. And after that, it is a time in the 17th century, the greatest advancement in the medical science it happened. And this is happened by a very famous English physician, William Harvey. Harvey even dissected his own freshly dead family members, his father and sister, before burial for study the anatomy. William Harvey showed that blood could move in one-way direction through the veins as well as through heart because there were one-way valves in both of them. When he tied arteries, they bulged on the side towards the heart, and when he tied veins, they bulged on the sides away from the heart. So blood must flow from veins to heart and from heart to arteries. So he also calculated the heart pump blood in 1 hour about 3 times the weight of a man. So by these simple experiments, the first picture is showing the publication of the William Harvey, where he is showing that how there is one way movement of blood. Then here we know now how the blood is moving in this closed circuit, and this is the echocardiogram of the movement of the arterial valve. This is the aortic valve. How its movement is unidirectional, it is shown in this picture. Another famous invention of this era is a microscope that is done by the Antony van Leeuwenhoek. He developed the most powerful microscopes of his day. He discovered one-cell protozoans and bacteria. His work eventually led to the discovery of the causes of diseases such as the Black Death or plague. The first vaccine was invented by Edward Jenner. Jenner was ridiculed and resented by his fellow doctors for this. This is a cartoon made here. It is showing how the Jennifer's inoculations were made fun by other people. So now we all know the importance of vaccines, especially after this massive pandemic. So the journey has been started by the Edward Jenner in 1749. Till now, the medical science have dealt with the medicines, with the surgeries, but 19th century was a century of anesthesiology. Here, during that time, all surgical procedures, it was done without anesthesia. In 19th century, physician administering chloroform prior to surgery. Ether was one of the earliest anesthetics to be used, but it was difficult to administer as it usually made the patients choke. Sir Humphrey Davy discovered the laughing gas, that is nitrous oxide, which has made going to the dentist much less painful. Stethoscope was invented in the year of 1821. Louis Pasteur argued that diseases were caused by germs and so effectively established bacteriology as a science. The year 1912, Sir Thomas Louis mastered the technology of the electrocardiogram. In the year 1921, he developed the mercurial sphygmomanometer that measured the blood pressure away from assessing the health condition of the heart. And the beginning of drugs, it was Dr. Gerhard Domgak discovered the sulfa drug. And sulfur was called at that time the wonder drug because it killed bacteria but did not hurt the cells of the human tissue. And Alexander Fleming, as we all know, 1981 to 1955, he discovered the penicillin, which killed the staphylococcal bacteria. It was a remarkable uh, invention at that time. It has changed the treatment of diseases. To 20th and the 21st century is the century of technology. So electron microscope, CT scan, MRI scan, PET scan, and the human genomic technique all are developed during this century. And we know that the utility of all these, it is very much beneficial for the treatment of diseases. Now what we want to say that how the medical school, their evolution happened. Now, what was the medical students 140 years ago? At that time, no one was worried about the NEET exams, and the admissions for entrance requirement were lower than they were for a good high school student. Instruction was superficial and brief. The terms lasted only 16 weeks, and after the second term, the MD was automatically given regardless of a student's academic performance. So those days were easy. At that time, the teaching was by lecture alone. The students were spared the hassle of attending labs, clinics, and hospital wards. It was not uncommon for students to graduate without ever having touched a patient. As a result of that, so many bad physicians they came out, they graduated, and they killed lots of patients. So as a result of this, there was a birth of John Hopkins University and Medical School, who has standardized the medical education. At Hopkins, a new era of American medicine was born with rigorous admission requirements and the quality of training that set new standards in the United States and compared favorably with the European institutions. Johns Hopkins University and Medical School, candidates for admission, they were required to have a 4-year college degree including 2 years of pre-medical training in biology, chemistry and physics, and a reading knowledge of French and German is also required. So now we are equipped with lots of medicines, lots of instruments by which we can image and we can detect the disease early. So we have invented so many drugs, so many technologies, so many genetic mapping. But the thing is that with the evolution of the science, there is evolution of the diseases as well. So initially, we have some certain type of diseases that we have cured with the help of medicines and new technologies. But then appeared the new forms of disease, the mutant variety of diseases, the COVID-like diseases, and the disease and the death and the sufferings are still going on. So how can we get rid of this? So as a physician, we not only we will treat our patient, we will learn about our subject and the skill, but also we should have to have a research orientation in order to combat the newer diseases, the newer threat to the humankind. So what is a research? Research is a state of mind. And who are researchers? These researchers are just like the musicians. These musicians are rare and talented individuals who had the natural gifts of both composition and execution. Now, most of the work, the scientific work, it is done by these dedicated musicians or researchers who are working relentlessly for the sake of the mind, for the benefit of the humankind. Now you may ask that, ma'am, we are not that much talented like the rare musicians. So there is a very good book I will ask you to read, that surely you are joking, Mr. Feynman. So Feynman was a famous physicist who got Nobel Prize. So famous is a type of genius. So here in this book it has been written that when we will see the work of Feynman, you will see that it is like a magic. So the magicians, there are certain magicians in the field of medicine and science, but most of the researchers, they are like us. They do it by their devotion, their dedication and their hard work. So there may be one or two Feynman who are the magicians, but rest of us, they have to do it by devotion, dedication and sincerity. Now, history of medicine will remain incomplete if we do not share the story of discovery of insulin. These are the three persons, Banting, Best and the MacLeod, who are the inventors of this miraculous drug insulin. In the spring of 1921, Banting, a young Ontario orthopedic surgeon, was given laboratory space by MacLeod, the head of physiology at the University of Toronto, to investigate the function of pancreatic islets. A student assistant, Charles Best, and an allotment of dogs were provided to Banting's hypothesis that ligation of the pancreatic duct before extraction of the pancreas destroys the enzyme secreting parts, whereas the islets of Langerhans, which were believed to produce an internal secretions regulating sugar metabolism, remained intact. They experimented on diabetic dogs with dismal results. But when they got to dog number 92, so many dogs were killed, but they could not identify or separate the hormone. The dog number 92, a yellow collie, when they injected the insulin into it, she jumped off the table after an injection of the pancreas extract and began to wag her tail. Okay, so diabetic, they have first made the dog diabetic, then they tried to give them pancreatic extract. At the dog number 92, so much relentless devotion you can see that they got the result. The yellow collie, she jumped off the table after an injection of pancreatic extract and began to wag her tail. During the time of this invention, the head of the laboratory, that is MacLeod, has spent the summer in Scotland. MacLeod returned to Toronto in the fall of 1921, rested and refreshed from his vacation, and reviewed the exciting research from Banting. So in the absence of MacLeod, Banting and Best, they actually invented. So here we can see the dog over here. The success with purification was largely the work of J.B. Colip. Yield and the standardization were improved by the corporation of Eli Lilly and the company. So this was the news on the Toronto Daily. Toronto doctors on track of diabetes cure. So in 1923, Banting and John James Ricard MacLeod received the Nobel Prize in Medicine. So it was Banting and the MacLeod. But the student assistant Best was not awarded the Nobel Prize. A strained relationship began and resentment developed between the student and the mentor, that is MacLeod and the Bent. And when Banting and MacLeod were awarded the Nobel Prize, Banting insisted on sharing his prize with Best, and MacLeod shared his with Colip. So years later, the official history of the Nobel Committee admitted that Best should have been awarded a share of the prize. So far it was a story of invention of insulin. Now how it has been utilized and saved life. So Elizabeth Hughes was a cheerful, pretty girl who grew up in the early 1900 centuries. She had straight brown hair and a large interest in art. She was diagnosed with diabetes when she was only 11. Doctors started her started her on the Dr. Frederick Allen diet, the only treatment for diabetes mellitus at that time, type 1 diabetes mellitus. The diet was basically a starvation diet. She started to lose weight and got 65 pounds, then to 52 pounds and 45 pounds after a dangerous episode of diarrhea. And she was 5 feet tall. She had survived on the diet for 3 years, far longer than her doctors had predicted, but she was getting sicker. Then her desperate mother heard some incredible news that insulin was tested in Canadian dogs with diabetes and they recovered from near death. So the mother approached these Canadian physicians. Elizabeth Hughes had a significant advantage. She was the daughter of Charles Evans, who was a member of the US Supreme Court. When Elizabeth's mother pleaded for insulin for her daughter, Dr. Banting replied initially that no insulin was available. But Banting changed his mind. So Elizabeth received her first insulin injection in Toronto, and it was a miracle. And rather than being an advocate for the treatment of diabetes mellitus, Elizabeth Hughes shaded away from the headlines that made her the most famous diabetic child in the United States. So this is a picture of Elizabeth before the starting of treatment of insulin, after insulin, and she died in the year of 1981 at the age of 74. So the miraculous act of insulin, it happened, and the invention, it was for the benefit of mankind. In the year 1922, the University of Toronto, the scientists went to a hospital ward with diabetic children. Most of them was comatose and was dying from diabetic ketoacidosis. This was another miraculous story of insulin. This is known as one of the medicine's most incredible moments. Imagine a room full of parents sitting at the bedside, waiting for the inevitable death of their dear child. The scientists went from bed to bed and injected the children with the new purified extract insulin. As they began to inject the last comatose child, the first child injected began to awaken. Then one by one all the children awake from the diabetic comas. A room of death and gloom became a place of joy and hope, thanks to Dr. Banting and Dr. Best. So this is the beauty of science. This is the beauty of medical science and its act for the benefit of the humankind. So as a medical student, you are the part of this medical science. You have to have good knowledge, skill, attitude, communication, ethics, and a mind of researcher. Many obstacles may come in the form of war, superstitions, cruel tyrannic rulers, but your quest should go from generation after generation. You should act as the torchbearer of the light. It will go still even in these dark ages. And after, we know that even after this massive pandemic, we are surviving because of this benefit of the science. So this year Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine, it has been awarded to these two scientists, and that is Victor Ambros and Gary Ruffin. Their action or their discovery of microRNA and its contribution to post-transcriptional gene regulation. I hope that all our students, they can follow the path of the actual path of medical science, that is the beneficence, non-maleficence, and good research activity. Thank you.